Welcome back for questions number 21 and 22, and these are from my book on preparing for the Linux Plus certification exam. So let's take a look at question number 21. Which of the following contains files that populate new users' home directories created with useradd? And our choices are login.defs, useradd, etc default useradd, etc skel, etc default grub. I know a lot of guys pronounce etc, they'll say etsy. So in the field, give you guys a minute to think about this. Pause your screen. And otherwise, the answer here is C, etsy skel. Let's talk about that directory here. Go to my Linux system. Let's change directory to etc skel. And right now I don't have any files there. Let me become root. I'll do su space dash, put in the root password, and let's list the files that are there. I'll do tac A. And so whenever we create a new user, files in etc skel automatically get copied to that new user's account. And these are the files that are copied to that new user's account. Let's take, for example, the bash RC file. I might want to make sure that for that new user, there's an alias for the remove command that's equal to rm-i, so that before a file is removed, to ask me first. Otherwise, the default for Linux is not to ask. It'll just remove the file. We'll create a new user in the next question, and we'll show you how this works. But meantime, I'm going to create a new file called readme. We'll say, welcome to the company. Don't worry about the spelling. We are glad you are a part of the team, the management. And since this is VI, I can use 2 uppercase Z's to quit. I'll exit from superuser. And remember, the SU space dash is going to also get the profile of root. So if I just said SU, I'll become the root user, but I won't get root's profile. So certain commands may not be where I want them to be. So I'll always use the SU space dash so I can also get root's profile. The other options were etc login.defs, etc default useradd. Let me talk about these two together. They're related. When a new user account is created, which again we'll talk about in the next question, the login.defs file gets read first, and then settings in there might be their mail directory or which group that new user should belong to. Where do user IDs start? And then any other terms that are not accounted for, or settings that are not accounted for, will be in etc default useradd. So we'll go ahead and take a quick look at the man page for login.defs. Well, let's just look at the file. More etc login.defs. And you can see the kinds of settings here. Like I said, where the user's mail directory will be created, and what happens if there are too many failed logins, and how to become super user. So the path environment variable for that new user. So a lot of settings defined here. User ID min, user ID max. And then if we look at more /etc default useradd, the default group that is defined, and we see it's commented out, so it's going to use the default group that we found in login.defs. What your default shell will be, that was at the top. Again, login.defs will define it first, and then this could override it, and where the skeleton directory is. So Let's take a look at this last one, and that's etc default grub. And etc default grub will here are your grub settings for when you boot. When your system first boots, you can use grub to choose a couple of things. For example, you might have a multi-boot system. It could boot into Windows or Linux. And so grub can be used to define which system we want to boot to. And there's a timeout of 5 seconds before we boot, before we choose which operating system to boot into. So anyway, these settings are defined in etc default grub, and then if you change these, run the update grub command, and that'll update the grub configuration file under /boot/grub/grub.cfg. So let's take a look at the grub timeout. Become super user. And I'll reboot. Oh, before I do that, cd/boot/grub, and here is the grub.cfg file, and you can see there's settings in here, and it says do not edit this file, make the changes in etc default grub, and then either run the update grub command or this other command called grub make config. So, and that'll build the the etc default, I'm sorry, the /boot/grub/grub.cfg file. This is what happens when you don't do SU-. Can't find the reboot command. Can't find the init command either. So I'll have to that's better. And I'm going to hit the escape key, but you notice the 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second, and then boom. So that 5-second timer shows up there. And at the top, we could select which operating systems to boot, but I decided to just go with the default. All right, so Debian will come up shortly. And while that's booting up, let's move on to the next question. That is adding users. You need to create a new account for a user named Ian Mausi on a Linux system and specify a username of imausi, a full name of Ian Mausi, a default shell of /bin/bash, and that a home directory be created. Which command will do this? I'll let you read these over. In the meantime, pause if you want to figure out the answer on your own. Otherwise, the answer for this one is A. Useradd -C. This is the comment field. Ian Mausi. M for make the directory. S for the shell that we want to give the user, and then finally their username. There is no -u for useradd for the username, so B is not the answer. And C is kind of tricky if you don't read it correctly. It says usermod. That's used to modify a user if they've already been created. But since this is a new user, usermod's not going to work. Usermod only works with users that already exist. And then we finally have useradd -C, the shell, Ian Mausi. And the issue with this one is it won't make the home directory. So we need that -m to make the user's directory. And let's go ahead and make this user. Log in as student 1. Bring up my shell. And we'll do a man on useradd. And just to show how this works, this is out of section 8. This is a command administrators can run. If we're in section 1, then it'd be a command that anyone could run. Here it talks about C is the comment string, so that's the comment we put in their name. And D is a home directory. We're going to go with the default though, so we didn't have the D option. And M to create the home directory. And S defines the shell. There's an option U, but that's to define the user ID number, not the username. So if we wanted to give the user an ID, normally it's going to default to the next user ID that's available. Here you can give it a different number. Maybe this user is coming from a different department and is used to a different number for the user ID, so we want to make sure that user ID is the same. TAC G to give the group ID. They talk about the etc scale directory that we mentioned, and this can be overridden inside of etc default useradd. We spoke about that file. And then again, this does also look at the login.defs file to create some of the settings as well for that user. Let's do a Q to quit, and let's see if we can add that user. So I'll become root. This time I use sudo to become root. And that way I can just use the student's password. Oh, not in the sudoers file. Won't do that then. I'll say useradd. And I'll go make the directory shell. So let's take a look at the there's Ian Mausi, and let's see if that file from XK0 made it over. So we can say tilde. The tilde means home directory. We want to go to the home directory of this user, go to that user's home directory, so tilde in their username. Make sure there is no slash after that tilde. And so we can see the README file made it. Let's take a look at it. And there it is. Welcome to the company. Glad you're part of the team, the management. Good to go. All right, so that's it for questions number 21 and 22. And we'll do 23 and 24 next, hopefully within the next week or two. If you enjoy these questions and they're helping you get ready for the exam, we ask that you please like and subscribe. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next video.